Hello, brilliant entrepreneur. It's Tash Corbin here, and welcome to another episode of the Heart-Centered Business Podcast. This is episode number 356, which means you can find all the relevant links and show notes for today's episode over at tashcorbin.com/356. In today's episode, I'm going to talk to you about practicing saying yes. I know that we are really focused on saying no more often and building our boundaries and being really clear on those, but I reckon sometimes it costs us. So I've got a podcast episode for you today where I want to present the case for yes and how practicing saying yes more often can lead to some phenomenal opportunities. Let's dive on in. I'm Tash Corbin, and this is the Heart-Centered Business Podcast. Okay, so there are entire books on how to say no. There are courses on how to say no. There are mentors you can work with on boundaries and saying no more strategically and more strongly. I totally understand that we, especially in this community, can tend to be overgivers, and we need to say no more often and practice better boundaries. However, I also think that sometimes being so fixated on those boundaries and saying no and staying really focused and not looking at anything else, we can sometimes be missing out on opportunities. So I also think that we need to balance saying no and having those strong boundaries with practicing saying yes as well. So looking for opportunities where we can say yes to something that may be a little unknown or where it may not be proven, but there's some potential there. There's some possibility. So the reason why I'm doing this podcast episode is I was recently working with a client inside the Takeoff program, and we were on one of our group calls. It was a couple of months ago now, and she was talking about how she had set these boundaries around guest speaking opportunities, things that she was invited to participate in, because, being really structured with time. But there was this concern, like this wonder of like, am I almost, cut off your nose to spite your face type thing? Like, am I actually costing myself good opportunities because I need them to be proven? So for example, she would not be on a podcast interview unless the podcast had been going for over a year. She would not participate in a summit or any joint venture things that were free. She was just like, no, blanket rule, no summits, no virtual events, anything like that, because she had participated in a couple of summits where it just didn't net the results that she had expected, and that had potentially been promised as well. Being a guest trainer inside someone else's membership was a blanket. It must be a minimum of $1,500 before I will do that. So there were these boundaries and these like very strong limitations on what this person would say yes to, which I think is very important for us to be clear on what is a great opportunity for us and what isn't. The challenge that this particular person had, though, was she was taking those boundaries from a mentor that she followed who'd been in business for years longer than she had an audience 20, 30 times her audience size, and spent a lot of money on Facebook ads to grow their audience. All of these opportunities that she was saying no to because they didn't meet these minimum criteria were actually brilliant strategies to grow her audience at a very low cost because she didn't have the marketing budget that her mentor had. And so this is one of those examples where I think sometimes being so strict and hard and fast on what your boundaries are on some of those opportunities can actually be costing us something potentially doing really brilliantly. So what I have today is 5 reasons to practice saying yes more often, and some examples of how something that may not look particularly attractive in the early stages can end up being something really amazing. Now, the one thing I want to say before we dive into 5 reasons to practice saying yes more often, is to first and foremost say though that I wouldn't go giant straight away. So it's still practicing discernment, but being a little more flexible is what I would call this. Yeah. So I still don't do podcast interviews if it's the first 6 to 12 months of that podcast. But for me, it's because I get invited onto podcasts so consistently. I'm not looking for lots and lots of podcasting opportunities because I can't get them. I'm actually invited onto podcasts quite consistently. So it's easy for me to have a boundary there, because having that boundary doesn't mean I have no opportunities. It just means that I'm being far more strategic with my time in those opportunities now. Whereas when it comes to in-person speaking events, I am looking to expand and do a few more of those. So I've been saying yes to in-person speaking events recently at rates where previously I probably wouldn't have, because I just want to get back out to events, and I just want to get back out into doing those in-person things more consistently. So I'm happy to say yes to those for a little bit more of an extended period of time right now, because it aligns with my existing priorities. So I'm not saying blanket yeses to everything. I'm just looking for potentially some reasons why we might be open to the possibilities a little more. So number one is that we actually learn and decide and learn how to discern through action. So it was only through doing free introductory sessions when I first started my business that I was able to be really clear on why I didn't want to do them, and be discerning about why it wasn't a fit for my particular business. So I was in a group program, and one of the strategies suggested for startup and for getting new clients on board was doing free 1 hour mentoring sessions, 1 hour coaching sessions, and just offering them across the board for free as much as you could on socials, and getting those initial clients, getting some practice. And it's always a lead generation strategy. So it's an opportunity to upsell into working together further. But then I also followed someone who their advice was never give away free sessions, right? One was give away tons of free sessions. One was saying never give away free sessions. And a few people in that program were like, oh, you know what? I don't want to, the reasons not to give away free sessions were very logical. Don't want to devalue my time. I don't want to do this, don't want to do that. Right? Okay, great. So I've decided I'm never doing free sessions. But actually, for some people, they decided to play with doing free sessions, and it was really good as a strategy for them. They made their first 10K within that program, and it was a 6-week program that we're doing on social media. It wasn't even anything to do with strategy. It was learning how to show up and grow your audience on social media, but it was just one of those suggestions. Well, why not just go and give away a bunch of free sessions? And so, yeah, quite a few people had significant income come in from giving away free sessions. My experience of giving away free sessions, because of my niche being in very early startup, was not the same. So when I was giving away free sessions, I was really struggling for people to say yes to them, because people were so used to seeing free sessions offered, and those free sessions basically being whole 1 hour sales pitches, and they weren't valuable. They weren't effective. So I struggled to give away free sessions. Also, if people did sign up, because it was free, I had a low show up rate. So I had 40% or more at times, people who signed up for those free sessions and said yes to them didn't show up. They just blanked on me. And so that felt like I was blocking out a bunch of time in my calendar to do these free sessions, and it was kind of, I didn't really like it. And then I also had people who came onto those free sessions saying, I know you're going to upsell me. I know this is a sales strategy. I just want you to know I'm not buying anything. I'm just here for the free coaching. And it felt quite awkward and uncomfortable as a way for us to start our working relationship. It also meant that when I asked important strategic questions like, how big is your mailing list? How much money did you make last month and the month before? Some people were cagey with their answers because they thought I was going to use that information to upsell them. I was going to use that information as a reason why they should and have to buy from me. I wouldn't do that, but it meant that I wasn't able to give them the best advice or really be as strategic in those sessions with them, because they weren't bringing everything to the table. They were being a little cagey around it. So I then experimented with low cost sessions and discounting my hourly rate for those first sessions with people. And it was super successful for me. Now, again, I had worked with a mentor who said, never discount your work, never ever offer discounts because you devalue yourself. But at that point in time, I didn't care if I devalued myself. I had a teeny tiny audience, and I would rather work with a bunch of people at a discounted rate than have no clients whatsoever. So I said yes to experimenting with a different style of strategy. And so this is where, like, it's really powerful for us to recognize that sometimes you need to actually just take action and do it once or do it a few times to really see that it's not for you. I had another example where someone came to me and said, I'm not doing webinars. I hate webinars. I hate listening to webinars. I don't like doing webinars. I don't like the whole sales pitch thing. I'm never running webinars. And all the reasons that they said that they didn't want to do webinars to me was just why they didn't want to do terrible webinars. And so I said, can we make a deal that you'll do 2 webinars using my structure and my strategy and then make a decision? Because we actually decide better through action. And this person said yes. And after their first webinar, they're like, I can see why I was resisting it, but I'm doing webinars. Webinars are amazing. And so we learn and decide through taking that action and actually seeing how it works for us. And I always say, try it twice, because the first time you're learning, you never know, things can be a little clunky. And then the second time you can really hit your stride. So I think that we learn and decide better through action. So that's a case for the yes. Rather than just taking some person's hard and fast rule about why, they're very logical reasons, right? I understand that. Never discount because people get the perception that you're always on sale, right? I totally understand, but that logic can be fuzzy depending on how established you are in your business, how many people are going to see that offer, how publicly do you offer that discount. They are all factors in to what extent it has that impact on your business. And there's a strategy to make sure that we reduce and minimize the damage that does, in inverted commas, compared to if we were to just go and offer it publicly and not have a strategy behind it. All right. Number 2, opportunities and wins can come from the most unexpected places. And so I think that's, it allows us to stay open to some new things to say yes to. So I have had several times where I haven't been sure about something, or I've been offered something, I think, I don't know. And then when I look at, I've got my main strategies bedded down, I've got the capacity to do this, I think, you know what, I'm going to give it a go. And some of the most amazing things have come out of the most random places. So one of the big ones for me was I participated in Elizabeth Goddard's Christmas party in 2022. And I hadn't really seen a lot from Lizzie at that point in time in terms of the collaborations she did with her audience. I loved her Facebook community. She's got a community for people who've ever purchased anything from her. I love her. She's always on the cutting edge of technology stuff. She has a very engaged audience. They're a really great place to go and ask questions about, has anyone tried this checkout, or I've got a problem with this shopping cart thing, or whatever it might be. And so I was seeing a bit more of Lizzie's content towards the end of 2022, and she had this opportunity, and it was to give something away for free in the party bag for her Christmas party. And I was like, you know what, I've got the time and space. Towards the end of the year, I don't do my own launches. I do my planner in October. Then I usually do a last launch of one of my programs for the year in November. But then in December, all I really do is Tashmas, which is a bunch of giveaways anyway. So you know what? I'm going to do it. And that ended up resulting in over 1,000 new people joining my mailing list. Some big momentum, because I put really cool things into the party bag, and will continue to do so for as long as Lizzie runs her Christmas party, by the way, because it's so much fun. And so I had a bunch of people who were then giving me a shout out and giving me great feedback, and it just had so many flow-on benefits to my business. I was so glad that I just went, you know what? Yeah, I'll give it a go. And so, sometimes those wins come from the most unexpected of places. The third case for saying yes, and having a little practice of saying yes to more things, is that sometimes it goes nowhere And sometimes it does perform as expected, right? Like underperforms just like you thought it might. But sometimes it blows you away. So I nowadays don't do podcast interviews for new podcasts. I'm like, get a few episodes under your belt. I want to make sure that it's going to actually see the light of day and you're going to stick around. But when I was wanting to do more guest podcasts a couple of years ago, I said yes to everything. And yes, some of those podcasts never went anywhere. Some of those podcast interviews hardly made it onto the internet, right? But some of them blew me away. I was on a podcast with someone who had a fairly new podcast and they were still finding their stride. But they were so prolific in sharing that interview that I did get new followers, and I could see she was getting a lot of comments when she was sharing it on Instagram, and she tagged me. And so like some of them really did amazingly. And actually from hers, I got invited onto another more established podcast because they'd heard me on her podcast. And that was really fabulous as an opportunity as well. So sometimes, look, it will go nowhere. And this is where I think sometimes we create those hard and fast rules that shut us down to new opportunities, is because we were on someone's early stage podcast once and it didn't go anywhere. And so now every early stage podcast is going to be painted with the same brush. Instead, we need to recognize that sometimes it does do nothing. I've been a participant in virtual conferences before that went pretty much nowhere, but I'm still open to being a speaker on virtual conferences because I know that they can have quite a lot of potential, especially if they are paid ticketed. They're not free. I would call a free virtual conference a summit, and I don't do free summits. Unless it's someone who's like a very big name, or there's, I've got some discernment, and I'm never ever person. But yeah, I am still willing to try them out. I know sometimes they don't go anywhere, and that's okay. I'm not putting all of my hopes and dreams on that one thing paying off. It's one of a number of things that I'm playing with and experimenting with as part of my strategies moving forward. So yeah, it's that sometimes it'll pay off, sometimes it won't, but don't need it to have to pay off 100% of the time for you to consider it as a good experiment, right? That's the thing. Then the fourth one is, are you really better off by knuckling down and working harder on what you've already planned, right? Yes, there's something very good about seeing your plans through, and there's something very auspicious feeling about being someone who's very strategic and you're very clear on your plan. But sometimes that plan is so narrow that actually sitting down and knuckling down on your own and working your way through your plan, you'll just end up like a project expands to take up the time that you give it, right? So it's Parkinson's law. So instead of saying, no, this is my plan and I do nothing else, and that's like I'm expanding the time that I spend on that, there sometimes are cases for us to see, actually, it probably would be better off if I experimented a little more. These strategies only get me so far. So, it's also that thing of like, are you really better off staying home and working harder compared to buying a ticket and going to an in-person conference, right? Sometimes we're so fixated on all the tasks we haven't done yet that we feel like anything else is a distraction. And I don't think it's that straightforward, right? Yes, I want to make sure that as much as possible I'm nailing my basics and my foundations and I've got my clear strategy, absolutely. But I don't do that to the exclusion of everything else 100% of the time, because I'm open to seeing what those new possibilities might be. And I'm open that there may be something fresh that could really scale up what I'm doing. So it's never really a hard and fast rule for me. And that's all I'm trying to plant the seed about. And then number 5 is that exploring those opportunities and measuring their results is what builds our skills in discernment. So one of the reasons why I am comfortable and confident to say I don't do startup podcasts anymore is because when I did do podcast interviews with everyone a few years ago, I actually measured the outcome of that strategy. So I would look at how many people were commenting on the posts that that person shared. I would look at the engagement of when I shared about that podcast. I would look for spikes in visits to my website or signups for my freebie that I promoted on that podcast episode. So I had ways to see if this was actually delivering on results. Similarly, when I did the free introductory sessions, I measured how many was I getting people signed up for each week. How many of those people actually showed up? How many of those people were very engaged in that? How many of those converted into paying clients eventually? And so it was through actually doing it that I was able to measure some results and see, well, actually compared to the paid sessions I'm doing, the free sessions are actually not as good. And so I'm going to focus on the paid sessions rather than the free ones. So sometimes it's saying yes to something fresh and something new so that you can be discerning and measure it against something you're already doing. So I have my core client attraction process and my core strategies that I use. And every quarter I have a new one thing that I'm playing with to see, is that going to add value to my client attraction process and I can stop doing something else, or does it cement and solidify? No, I'm just going to stick with tried and true. And most quarters I stick with tried and true, but some quarters I'm like, ooh, actually I am going to swap that out because that works way better at the moment. So yeah, it's the application and the building the skills and the seeing the results and measuring that allows us to build our skills in discernment, which is really important. Okay, so another example that I want to talk about here in terms of saying yes is my experience creating the Heart-Centered Virtual Business Conference. So when I created the Heart-Centered Business Conference back in 2016, there were a lot of people who asked me to do a live stream, like a virtual ticket to that conference. And as an extrovert person who is very mindful of holding space at my events, regardless of whether they're online or in person, I just felt it wasn't the right thing for me at that point in time. I wanted to just focus on the people in the room. And so for 2017 conference, 2019 conference, we did not have a virtual live stream. And I was pretty adamant that I wouldn't do a virtual live stream from the in-person conference, because as an attendee at virtual live streams from in-person conferences, it just didn't work, and it's rare to see it actually done very well. And also from a provider perspective, I just was not comfortable with dividing my attention between people in the room and people in the virtual room. I wanted to give my full attention to people in the room. But during COVID, the opportunity presented itself to run a purely virtual conference because we had to delay the in-person conference. And so I was like, well, this is a perfect opportunity for me to have a go at a purely virtual conference to see what needs to happen to make that work really well, and also to be able to make a decision about, am I open to doing a virtual live stream of conference into the future? And it was brilliant to show me that no, I will not be live streaming conference virtually. But I love hosting virtual conferences, but I need them to be separated. So what it showed me was actually, yes, with a virtual conference, the requirement to hold that virtual space and to keep people engaged and be very present to that event is higher than the one that's in the room. And so I ended up running 2 virtual conferences, 2020 and 2021, and both of them were amazing. They were super profitable. They grew my audience and my reach really brilliantly. They created so much rich connection and networking amongst the people who attended. We had raving fans. We broke the internet at one point. Like, it was just absolutely spectacular. So what it did was it solidified for me, I'm not going to live stream the in-person conference, but I absolutely am open to bringing back a virtual conference wink, wink, at some point in the future. And so 2023 is the year that we bring back virtual conference. Now that the in-person conference is sold out over a year in advance, it means that I have the capacity to run and promote virtual conference because I have 0 promos to do for in-person conference between now and September 2024. So it's created space for me to run a virtual conference again, and it's created opportunity for me to get back into that strategy. And I know running a virtual conference is a good thing because I did it when I had the opportunity. And so it's been really powerful for me to also see, actually, I'll say about that, virtual conference is far more profitable than in-person conference. So it also allowed me to see how to maximize profitability of a virtual conference, something along those lines, and how virtual conference can help fund some of the things that we do in the in-person conference. Because the in-person conference, there are some limitations around how profitable that can be. There's limitations on attendee numbers because the room is only so big. And there's limitations in terms of how much I'd be willing to charge for tickets and those sorts of things. So it's really helpful for me to see, well, the conference as a whole can be a package of 2 things, virtual conference and in-person conference, and they can actually be funding models for each other in terms of profits, and also feeder things for speakers as well. So there are some unknown speakers who I wouldn't necessarily invite onto the in-person stage without having, worked with them or seen them present or been to something else of theirs. Well, I can invite them to speak at virtual conference, and because there's more speaker spots there. Also, I love putting members of my community and listeners of my podcast on the stage. There's only so many spaces in the in-person conference. There's more of those spaces for virtual conference. So I'm treating virtual conference as another opportunity to platform you as my audience and get you speaking opportunities. And so, it's really, really, I'm really, really grateful that I said yes to doing that when my experience of being a virtual conference attendee in the past had been quite poor. But I was like, but I know why, and I know what I would do instead. I think I'm going to give this a go. And so that was a really good one. All right. So hopefully I've presented a fairly strong case for practicing saying yes to a few more things, maybe trying some things out with those boundaries. I'm not saying just say yes to everything, but if you haven't seen the movie Yes Man, I really do love that movie. There's things that are problematic, but just that concept of being open to more things, and when you say yes to things and when you're in that flow, like how much amazingness happens. So hopefully that's been really helpful for you. And I have an opportunity for you as well. It is that we have virtual conference. If you're listening to this before the 5th of November, 2023, virtual conference is happening from the 5th of November. And I am actively looking for speakers. So if you come to the show notes of today's episode at tashcorbin.com/356, there is a link to our application form to be a speaker at the Heart Centre Business Conference virtual. I will be keeping that list. Even if you're not selected, that list will remain like my speaker pool for me to draw from, not only for future virtual conferences, but future in-person conference and other future in-person and virtual events as well. So I will be going on a speaking tour, for example. I'm going to get other people to speak on stage with me there. I do run like road shows and other things that I haven't done since 2018. They will be making a comeback as well. So if you are interested in being considered as a speaker in front of audiences like mine, then please do make sure that you come over to the show notes at tashcorbin.com/356 and pop in your application to be a speaker there. It doesn't take much for you to pop your application in. And if we need any further information, we can be in touch. All right, lovely peeps. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the Heart Centre Business Podcast. I hope to hear how you're saying yes to more things, or if this has sparked any convo starters for you as well. Feel free to send me a DM or email me at support@tashcorbin.com. If you want to follow on from this conversation, just let me know. You've been listening to episode number 356. And until next time, I cannot wait to see you shine. Bye for now. Would you like more tips, tools, and resources to help you grow your heart-centered business? Head to tashcorbin.com today.